And we're back. My name is David Frise. My apologies to anybody who missed the modern slavery presentation earlier. We've rescheduled it for midday. I'm afraid we just got too many technical issues on the presentation, but we're going again at midday. So here we are on the next session, which is called Stop Passing the Buck. And I guess it's some reflections on the Grenfell inquiry and what we've learned to date. And we have three panelists today. We have Peter Yates, who's Regional Framework Director for Constructing West Midlands. He's also Vice Chairman of the National Association of Construction Frameworks. So welcome, Peter. And then we have Chris Yates, Chief Executive of FETA. I'm sure you can explain a bit more who FETA is in a second, Chris. And then Rachel Davidson, who's Director of Certification at BESA. Welcome to you all. I'm glad to see that Chris and Peter got the blue shirt memo, and they look remarkably like brothers, although as private, I would say, are they perhaps related? I can confirm you're not, are you?
No, we haven't fully checked that, but I don't think so. No.
You do look a bit like twins, I have to say. So, here we are.
We'll use that to our advantage, I'm sure.
I guess we'd start off with, I've made several observations, one of which to George Clark yesterday, that for many in the industry, it appears that Grenfell really happened in a different country, and it's really not touched or impacted them in the way that I thought it should have done and driven behaviour changes. And so I'd like to kick off with, how do you see it? Do you think it is driving significant change, or for a large portion, is it still not there? And I'll start with Peter, if I may.
Thanks, David. And David, thanks for the introduction. I should probably also just declare, since the Grenfell tragedy, I initially volunteered, and obviously we're 4.5 years in, to support the Local Government Association as their representative on Government's Industry Response Group, which was set up in response to Grenfell, and I'm the co-chair of the Industry Response Group's competency steering group. I also sit on some of the technical committees, some of the British Standards committees, looking specifically at sort of cladding related issues. So I'm fairly, if you like, had a fairly in-depth engagement, certain niche areas of what we've been looking at, supporting Dame Judith and the likes of Sir Ken Knight on some of the panels. I think your reflection on, if you like, its impact on the broader industry is absolutely spot on, David. I mean, it saddens me in many ways that we're 4.5 years in, and actually where I'm based here in the West Midlands, we're a West Midlands-based framework, and we work hand in glove with the likes of Birmingham, Solihull and Sandwell councils and many others in the region. Everyone's sort of watching and waiting, and I don't think it helps having had the kind of it taking so long to get the building safety bill out, with some very high level and to be applauded strategic approach in there. But until we see the primary legislation coming out, the really kind of the nitty gritty of to how this is going to impact industry, I think it's a watch and wait, particularly at those at the kind of the grassroots and the kind of really at the sharp end delivery of things. And certainly from a local government perspective, and what we do within construction frameworks is we are very much on the practical delivery side of things for local government, public sector across the UK. And so we cover sort of England and Wales in our broader National Association group. What we've been calling for is that real impact on the kind of the behavioural, I mean, some would call it cultural change of, if you like, the tiers all the way down to sort of, the operatives that physically on our sites, whereas what seems to be happening is a kind of, without being at all rude to colleagues who are spending a lot of their lives and a lot of time and effort in this, the Westminster bubble being very focused on a high-level top-down regulatory response. So I'm hoping that following the top-level down approach, and I know there is lots of work in train because I'm cited on some of it in respect of the regs. It will then cascade down, but we have taken that kind of peculiar approach of let's get it right at the top, almost the good getting better, if you like, and where it is far less regulated right at the bottom. And this is what we were calling for, certainly from the Local Government Association's perspective and a public officer's perspective, is we need to get the quality and the kind of behavioural aspects of this right at the coalface, because frankly, if those on sites aren't delivering, we don't know what we're getting as the as-built, and we continue to not know what we're getting as the as-built. And that hasn't changed, frankly. And come June of next year, we'll be 5 years post-Grenfell. And it's a sad reflection, but with Brexit and with the pandemic, I think, I've noted in a number of our speakers' pieces that it kind of it's drifting out of consciousness, the kind of memory, immediate memory of what happened at Grenfell. And I think for some of us, we're going to make sure that doesn't happen.
Thank you. And Chris, what's your view on that?
I mean, I'm relatively new to FETA in terms of I started in beginning of September, but I think our associations are sort of fairly heavily involved in that sector. We've got the National Association of ADCAS is one of ours for ductwork contractors, Smoke Control Association. I would say that we have done quite a lot of work to raise standards within the industry, and I think taking Peter's point about what's happening at the lower levels, I think we're seeing we've got our own code of practices in place for our members. We're also looking at compliance, sort of competence within the individuals as well, and I think we're seeing a change certainly where some of the organisations are calling for organisations to be competent as well. And I think that's going to be a really important part of this, because I think what we don't want to be doing is taking the micro SME out of the equation, but to make sure they're in an environment where they are fully trained, they're competent, and they can be part of this type of work. But I think there's certainly more work that we feel can be done probably between the various tiers of the supply chain working together and actually having a better understanding of the issues that arise within each part of that. But for me, a lot of this, I think, gets driven by industry. I have to take the lead. I mean, I've got quite a lot of experience in gas and gas appliances generally, and I would say the best initiatives that we've taken have been driven by the industry itself rather than it being driven by government. It's enabled us to get is to raise that bar, get much better solutions, practical solutions that can be implemented. And I think that for me is going to be where this will change going forward. So I think for us, primary legislation is important, but I think us looking at it as industry and seeing how we can take this forward and improve standards is going to be absolutely critical.
Thank you. And Rachel, you deal with both individuals and companies. Have you noticed a change in attitude?
Just to explain what I'm involved in is the certification and compliance schemes for the sector. And I've been running personnel registration schemes and company compliance schemes for decades now within the association. And the frameworks for competence and compliance have been in place for many years. And it's always been down, and the reason why the say personnel registration schemes haven't been widely taken up, or for example the competent person schemes either, has always been put down to a lack of government enforcement. But I think the comment is right that industry must buy into this. We've been waiting for government to enforce competence and compliance schemes for years, and it doesn't happen. We do need to see a sea change within industry. So, and I think it comes down to quality. We run personnel registration schemes such as the CSCS logoed skill cards for individuals. Now, those frameworks have been in place. They can very much be modified to reflect the skills, knowledge, and behaviours that we're seeking to get demonstration of. But there are wider issues as well, that we need training to become available, good, cost-effective, time-effective training, and the competent person schemes, for example, because it's not just about checking the individuals, it's about making sure that the companies that are delivering the work are delivering a quality job. And the competent person schemes are very good at checking the companies. But I do feel that the trade associations and membership organisations have a key role to play as well in checking the competence of their members. And therefore, if clients can use that process via specification, then we really do start coming together and collectively driving towards the vision that we're seeking.
Well, we'll come on to that in a second. If I could just go through, though, how you think behaviours have changed, and specifically around when Judith Hackett said, for example, that clients should understand and feel their responsibilities. Peter, do you feel that now in the framework organisations, that clients understand and feel their responsibilities to a greater degree? And if so, what are they doing to implement that?
Without being mischievous, David, I think that they're kind of sweating as to what's coming down the line, especially with the kind of drive in respect of the regulator and the accountable person scheme and the principal roles that are likely to be put in place. I mean, a number of things we called for, if you like, very much from a public sector, local government perspective, which was to get the brass plaque on each of the buildings, digital, of course, nowadays, but that defines who's actually responsible and accountable for the safety of those individuals within it. And the analogy we used was the kind of any public house you go to has got that kind of brass plaque on. Why haven't we got the same for people where the residences and families domicile? But the other thing we call for, and Rachel and Chris both touched on that, is the whole absolute grassroots competence scheme. We asked for an enhanced approach in respect to the CSCS card. I'm a CSCS card holder. I'm sure everyone on this call is, and most of our colleagues in the industry are. But actually, it's fundamentally a kind of a point in time, refreshed occasionally. Can you pass multiple choice safety? The ability to walk onto a site doesn't actually physically go into the kind of the tangible. Are you competent of carrying out that piece of work? So the trades-based focus, we called for something, and I don't know how deliverable this is, but I don't know how much equally. I'm very alive to your audience, David. Something equivalent to the gas safety register, where in order to be able to be qualified in respect to that, and from Chris's background in this as well, you have to actually physically apprenticed or actually signed off work that is deemed to be competent. And because of the focus on the top end of this, we're sort of not getting the bottom end yet. We hope that comes. But back to your point in respect of clients, our real drive, and from a personal perspective, I also sit on the National Procurement Strategy Group, which is a group which works in conjunction with the Procurement Advisory Group, central government's procurement group. And the argument over years is that, I suppose, as industry has developed and new roles have evolved, procurement and those commissioning clients have ceased in many quarters, in particular in public sector, to be construction professionals. They're generic procurement types. So off the back of the work we did, I sat on Dame Judith's procurement group, and we passed on advice. I was there from a local government perspective, and we very deliberately, if you like, filled the gap in what we felt wasn't in Dame Judith's work, which was to set up a working group 11, which was explicitly around procurement and very much focused on procurement in public sector, because the game has been, and this does come down to, I respect it's kind of detailed, technical, but things like the public contract regs, whereby if you're public sector, We can't specify by product and product name, supplier name. It has to be seen to be clear, open, transparent for all the right reasons, for public probity and public protection, public purse. But what it means is that we very often can't rely on what it is that we're getting. It has to be kind of attached to a performance specification, and that becomes, I think, quite problematic and difficult for those who are not from a trained construction background. And if you look at the complexity of any of the buildings we work, they are hugely complex beasts. Even just your average, multi-story building contains God knows how many different design specialist disciplines and trades that have to be involved. So we're not asking for the absolute expert. We looked at the German proof engineering approach, where these superlative individuals who are able to sign off on stuff could be involved as advisors from the start. We don't have that kind of process in the UK, but where we have really moved on is the need for those who are in procurement to understand that they have a responsibility resting on their shoulders, that when they say it's got to be done for £5 million and it's got to be done by September, that actually the design team and the contracting team are advising and giving them proof of concept to be able to do that. And it's not just a case of them thumping the table and you will make it happen in X amount of money in X amount of time, which we've got lots of evidence for. It's kind of race to the bottom. And as we all know on this call, and doubtless your listeners will know, the construction industry is pretty tight. It's a pretty mean industry. Margins can be notoriously low, particularly as you kind of push down the chain. And when clients are responsible for squeezing certain parameters, but without understanding the kind of impact on that and how that is impacted down the tiers of the supply chain, then it's not surprising that certain behaviours or shortcuts are adopted. My biggest bugbear is that as an industry, I'm just about old enough to remember, because I apprenticed with Clerks Works, we've gone from that signing off in respect of a kind of an independent verification of buildings, people independent of the design team, the contracting team, and also able to face off to the client and say, no, what you're doing here is not acceptable. We've lost those in the kind of suites of contracts that we look for, and as an industry, we've kind of taken a lot of the resilience and the quality out of what we do. So the idea that some of the trades bodies could adopt that kind of quality approach, I think it's a commercial opportunity. I think it can be monetized. The idea of what price safety, we have had these debates with government. I think it's a binary choice. It shouldn't be different levels of safety. People ought to feel that they can live in a safe building, and that's full stop. And I think trades bodies could reflect on the fact that when you're selling a half-hour fire door, it should last half an hour, and not, as we've seen, 9 minutes in some cases. Reflecting on what the clients can do, they absolutely have to step up to the plate here, and it's something that we've been working very closely with RICS and SIPs and CIOB. In particular with SIPs, because if you like, the SIPs in many cases are better represented in public sector in procurement terms, and they are working with Duncan Brock at SIP, being very, very proactive in supporting us through the Hackett and post-Grenfell groups, and working with central government and a host of industry colleagues, I should say, to make sure that there are new procurement modules built into the SIPs training, so that where they have specialist modules around things like building nuclear power stations, very, very specialist. Actually, there should be an equivalent specialist models around high-risk, high-rise residential buildings. The group is calling for more than actually any habitable buildings. There's a right to sort of safety, and in respect of procurement, we think that golden thread that Dame Judith talks about, that iterative approach for designers, for the specialist supply chain, for contractors to be able to always go back and respond and answer those questions, or at least hold the client to account to say decisions you're making here are going to impact safety this way down the chain. And the other thing we've called for, just finally before I get off my soapbox, David, is something equivalent to the SCOS and CROSS that our iStrucT, our structural colleagues have in respect of whistleblowing or anonymous calling out of malpractice or cutting of corners. We don't have that broadly across industry, and it's quite incredible that we don't when you think about it.
I think it's interesting to know that the Building Safety Act has something on behavioural change. So the requirement that if you know you're breaching building regs or it's wrong, you should not do it and say so. And also the requirements of whistleblow. I think that's the first time, certainly according to Rudy Klein, that's the first time that's appeared in legislation. We'll come back to the Clerk of Works in a minute, if we may. But Chris, from your perspective representing manufacturers, they've taken some flack in the Grenfell inquiry. How have they changed, do you think?
I think there's, I would say there's a very, and I can't, as I say, I can't comment what it was like at the time of Grenfell particularly, but talking about what I'm seeing certainly at the moment is I think manufacturers are embracing the need to get properly trained workforce. Rachel mentioned the difficulty of trying to achieve that, and we're looking at ways of upping the skills within the sector. I would be quite, certainly waiting to see what happens with the competency review that's going on at the moment, that we should see hopefully some outputs from that end of this year. But in parallel to that, we're addressing the whole need of training, because I think even if you put to one side the tragedy that happened and the awfulness of that, is I think as a manufacturer, and having been a manufacturer for going probably 25 years, you're trying to minimise the problems on site anyway, and therefore you want, because it impacts on your warranty costs at a very simple level, and it clearly impacts customer action. So trained installers are crucial. We talked about Gas Safe Register and the impact that has had on quality, albeit even now I think probably a couple 100,000 installations a year are not notified. So you don't catch everything, but it goes a long way to support that. But I think in terms of the developers as well, if I can perhaps touch on that and just talk about some of the changes I've seen there. I mean, I was discussing this with one earlier this week where, and I mentioned it in my answer to the first question, is that they are pushing to get both the individual and the companies accredited, but done through a third party. And I think because they've assessed the risks and they've said, look, we need to adapt as a business, and recognizing the fact that the industry is made up of tier one suppliers, but also micro SMEs as well. And I think whilst you can argue it raises costs for the contractors further down, I do think there is a huge improvement in terms of quality, safety, and ultimately, that should lead to business improvement as well. So I think manufacturers have, under the importance of training, and we certainly as an organisation are, helping them get towards that. And I think with quite significant changes over the last few years as well, specifically around the tragedy of Grenfell as well.
So you see a scenario occurring where manufacturers follow it beyond the factory gate, rather than, if I describe it before, as at the factory gate their responsibility ends and they pick it up as a defect. If it's not correctly installed, they need to follow it through.
I think so. And I can think of personal examples I've had where if you don't understand how that product works in the system, you're going to get problems. You're not going to understand what the interface is between how your product operates in that building under those scenarios. And we can do product testing. And that is that's in a lab condition. Anybody who's involved knows that doesn't reflect necessarily what happens on site. You're trying to simulate that, but also you're trying to test your product. And quite often, manufacturers will go beyond what's in the product standard. You've invariably got other tests that you can run to try and cover as many scenarios as possible. But ultimately, as I said, it's how it performs in that building. And if you understand how that works, how it fits in as part of it, you will definitely reduce your costs in terms of warranty, but you'll get a better solution to it as well. And I think we've got to reach out to other sectors of the market so we can work together. We're actually, we're members of the National Home Improvement Council, which I'm also a non-exec director of. And for that very reason, we can connect with fabric associations, Bathroom Manufacturers Association as well, which is, if we're looking at the product framework policy that's coming up for energy-related products that's due out next week, we're looking at reducing energy efficiency. There's strong arguments that I'm seeing there that says that if we can work across other parts of the industry, we could go back with better solutions for government in terms of the way that they generate their policies. So, yes, long response maybe to a short question, David, but definitely I think understanding how the product works in a system is, I think, critical going forward.
Great. So, Rachel, what are BESA doing to help contractor members evidence their competence and compliance?
I mean, BESA actually introduced 18 years ago inspection and assessment. So for any company that wanted to join the association, they had to be inspected and assessed, and basically that was a competence check on their business and whether they actually technically could do the job. Over the 18 years to date now, that inspection and assessment scheme went through a fundamental review, and it's now called the Competent Assessment Standard. So as a member organisation, any company that wants to join the association must be competent assessed, and that assessment's carried out by a third-party UCAS accredited body. And I think the good thing about the competent assessment standard is it's done in two parts. So it checks the business assurance processes of the company, so that the operating standards and the insurances, the health and safety, etc. But it goes further than that. And this is where the role of a technical association does really come into play, because the second part of that audit is a technical site audit on a fully installed and commissioned piece of work. So we're actually testing the company to say, well, actually, can you technically do the job that you have stated that you can do? And that's the criteria for membership. If a company doesn't meet these standards, then I'm afraid we can't accept them into membership or maintain that membership. And when we were talking about the personnel registration schemes, such as the CSCS logo card, and that reassessment of competence is critical, really, to inject into those frameworks. That's exactly what the competent assessment standard does. So the members are reassessed at least every 3 years, or if there's a triggered event before that.
Great, thank you. Peter, I said we'd come back to Clerk of Works, which you mentioned. I too remember Clerks of Works and thought they were great, but I think their average age is something like 58 or 60 or something at the moment, and so we'd have to reinvent the whole thing. My problem with Clerk of Works is that it breeds that culture of, if they don't spot it, I've got away with it. Should companies and contractors be taking responsibility for their work? And if so, how would they evidence that they've actually done the job properly, particularly engineering services where much of it is hidden?
Yeah, that's a great question, David. And you'll forgive me, I'm going to put my architect's hat on here. So hopefully there's not a boo from the audience. But as many years as a practicing architect, it's been a bugbear of mine that you're very right to say any individual trade specialist design team is very capable of assessing the quality of their individual facet of the build that they're put together. It's that interface and it's the connectivity. If ever, and I'll have snagged God knows how many thousands of buildings in my career, it's not the individual products you're looking for, it's where they've joined them together. It's the kind of gubbins that they kind of glue them together. It's the junction between a roof and a wall. It's the window and the wall. It's the frankly, it's the services and the architectural, the structural grid. And if you ask that question, who coordinated the layouts, and there's that kind of blank look around the project team, you right, come on guys, you've really got to pull it together here. But the number of times you go on a site and actually work, you kind of ask the question, why are those conduits running across that window, or why that's moved that doorway, because of where, because risers, ductwork, conduits, very often not designed down to the sort of the nth degree, and from the broader kind of the technical perspective of delivering builds, I think certainly when we had clerk of works who weren't just the generalists, but actually had specialist technical clerk of works, and I've had the privilege of working with, lift-based, concrete-based, certainly, if you like, generalist MEP clerk of works, as well as the building fabric ones. And I think really the love affair with clerk of works sort of drifted away when actually I think in particular local authorities going through compulsory competitive tendering worked out it actually cost us quite a lot of money to check. And so turning the question on its head back to you, David, I think we turned round. I mean, it wasn't me, I was a junior architect at the time, as you appreciate, but the kind of industry and certainly the clients turned around and said, well, why are we paying? Why should we be checking our own work and letting industry get away scot-free? But I think it's gone away too far the other way now, in that there is a reliance on asking others to check it. And there's this phrase that's been floating around through all of the Grenfell Hackett groups who've been involved in. It's that not knowing what you don't know. And if you don't know what you're doing is wrong, or you don't realise the impact it may have on others, and I've seen it firsthand, I shan't betray where it is. It's not a million miles away from where I am. A company that came in to refit a fire alarm system, and in doing so, compromised all of the fire compartmentation in the building by just core drilling through all the compartments. So we get these things happen. They happen frequently. Now, and sorry, David, back on the soapbox again, a point I'm desperate to make here, and that's the conversation today is very much around, and has been through all the Grenfell stuff, around new build. It's the kind of when we build these great big, architectural monoliths where everyone's involved. And given what's going on, up in Glasgow at the moment, and the what we face in the UK, but globally, is a retrofit agenda that is absolutely enormous. It eclipses what we're going to have to do in terms of new build over the coming years. And the retrofit thing, I don't think has been properly addressed through the work that, frankly, all the groups are doing, sort of post-Hackett and their sort of post-Grenfell work. I think it's where very often cracking organisations such as yours and FETA are very well versed and very well understood in the new build side of things. But very often the lowest cost, the lowest denominator kind of scrapes the barrel in some of these one-off, forgive me for being pejorative here, the kind of, the white van man or the white van woman who kind of comes in and just does that kind of, I'll just do a piece of, very low value retrofit work. The one that everyone seemed to be pointing to was the cable TV guys and gals who come in and just, turn up in a van and not recognising the kind of the technical standards might be run to a very close technical tolerance, but if they go and drill through, fire stopping and they make that hole bloody wide and sort of pack it up with non-fire retardant foam, straight away have compromised or created a route to fire to the building. So in terms of that, where can Clerk of Works? We're looking at, as you're probably alive to, the independent construction assessor. It's something that, from an LGA's perspective, we're actively lobbying to make that very much a hands-on approach, not just a desk-based, desktop kind of approach, to make sure that what goes on site, what is the as-built, and what is being done on a site. Back to Rachel's point on the CSCS cards, what we do on our sites is we have biometric chipped gateways to make sure that nobody can physically get on the site unless they can show that they've got some sort of technical registration. Now, those things can be compromised, they can be copied, there's ways around them. We're asking for an enhanced version of that. But how then the kind of the quality checking side of industry steps up to the plate, it's a demand that we're sort of making now. And yes, I think industry, and certainly the SME and the specialists in those SMEs, has got a huge role to play. But in particular around the what I would describe as the grey area of design, which is not the your lead engineer or your lead architectural team. It's all those specialist supply chain packages with the draftsmen and draftsladies who are sitting there in the background, churning out the actual details of how these things are going to work. And I think there's a real responsibility to be had there.
We're nearly out of time. When I looked at this and thought 40 minutes, no presentations, I'm really in trouble here. I'm never going to do this, but we're nearly out. So I'm going to make this the last question, I think. you're now there. Is there one thing that you would do for the industry that you think would make an instant difference? One thing that could be applied that would make it work? And I'm going to start with Chris on that.
Well, that's an interesting question. I think the one thing is probably going back to what I was talking about before about the realizing that the sort of manufacturer's point of view, that it is part of a bigger system, and we just need to embrace the need to change. Let's not wait for regulation to come in. Let's look at how we can raise the bar ourselves. I think we're doing a lot of that already. I think and I think it's asking ourselves the difficult questions and start the journey now rather than waiting for it to get imposed later when it might not be the ideal solution. So now's the time to change. A bit like Peter was mentioning about COP26. You don't want to wait till it's a crisis. Let's start doing the baby steps now that will help to build the foundations that we can create a much more robust industry going forward.
And Peter?
Yeah, and if I may, I'll massively springboard off Chris's points he's made in respect of understanding the system, and that's again questions we've raised. If you look at the chemical and the pharmaceutical industry, there is a whole focus on kind of contraindicators, and it's not about kind of upselling everything or selling the absolute superlative of stuff. It's presenting those who are using those products in scenarios and situations where they should and shouldn't. And I think it's about, I suppose, just about being a bit bolder, being a lot more objective, and actually saying you shouldn't use these systems. If you look at most products out there in the market at the moment, they'll tell you all the great things they can do. And if you're a designer, or if you're a client somewhere way up the top of the food chain, you won't understand the scenarios where you shouldn't be using those. And I think there should be UK should look at a kind of a contraindicator legislation that sits like pick up a pack of paracetamols and it'll tell you what you shouldn't combine them with. Exactly the same with the chemical industry and the COSH system. There's scenarios where you shouldn't use said products, and I think we tend to just sort of tuck those under the rug and forget about them. But there is enough scenarios. There was enough warnings of Grenfell before Grenfell happened, and the sad thing is it took that catastrophic loss of life for us to kind of sit up and listen. And with a host of things going on in industry out there, we've kind of it's drifting away, and I fear it will drift away, and we'll just go for some generic bureaucratic approach that kind of is a halfway measure.
Great. And Rachel, I need a very short answer from you, I'm afraid.
Well, I mean, I really feel that there's an appetite and a desire to change, and I think we just need to keep the pace, keep the collaboration going between the bodies, the professional bodies, trade bodies, because we need to just keep going, and I believe that we'll get there.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you very much to Peter and Chris Yates, the digital twins, as they're probably going to be called now. We had a good session on that yesterday. And to Rachel Davidson, thank you very much indeed. That's been really fascinating. I think we could have probably talked for about 3 hours on this subject, but thank you very much and good afternoon.